The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Knights of Ren, episode 702. It is an exciting time, and we're going to be talking about store championships for at least this episode and probably lots in the near future. So before we get started, just want to give a shout out to all of our Patreons. Thank you so much for your support. With your help, we've been able to do a lot in the Star Wars Destiny community. So if you're listening and you've enjoyed the show, definitely check out the Patreon. Every dollar helps. So let's just jump right into the thick of it. We've got just a ton of things going on, a lot of decks out in the meta, and I went to a store champ, and Nick went to a store champ. So this time around, we've got Rick, and we've got Nick. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, doing good. Just got back from vacation from this weekend, and finally get back into the swing of things.
So where did you go? Because I know you were talking about something of Overwatch League in California?
Yeah, went over to LA, hung out there, met my cousins, went to a store champ, saw some Overwatch League. It was fun times. But yeah, I actually did do my very first store champ this year at a store in the Los Angeles area, which is kind of funny that I didn't even do it locally first. But we got to meet up with some notables like Agent of Zion and Hexen from Artificery, and Hex has definitely done stuff with the Galactic Senate too.
So tell us a little bit about the store champ. I know metas are very different depending on the city and even sometimes the store. So what did you bring? Obviously, what did Zion play? What did Hexen play? Who won? What did well? You know, give us the lowdown on all that good stuff.
Yeah, so there was a good mix of stuff there. Like, let's see. So Zion played Rose, Elite Rose, Wedge, and a hired gun as a vehicle deck. Hexen played Elite Rose, 2 Partisans with long-term planning as a vehicle deck. And I played Thrawn Snoke as a vehicle deck. So a lot of vehicles there today. There were 2 other Thrawn Snokes as well. So, you know, multiple Thrawn Snokes. I think that was it, like, for the vehicles between, like, the 3 Thrawn Snokes and then Agent of Zion and Hexen's list. There's a good bit of Kylo Price, too, but I didn't actually end up facing it. And none of it did too well. There was someone was playing R2-P2, and I think she went 3-1, which is, you know, pretty good. Can't really ask for much better. Strength of schedule might have screwed her, but yeah, there's a good representation. My wife was playing Plo and Padawans, and Zion's wife was there too, playing Rex, clone, hired gun. So there's a bunch of different stuff. I was the one that went undefeated in Swiss in just like the 4 rounds. It was like a 22 people or so. It wasn't too bad. Actually, my hardest match was probably against Rex and the hired gun, because sometimes Rex just does a lot of damage, and Thrawn Snoke doesn't actually have that much health with it being a 2-character deck. It has probably about the most you can hope for in a 2-character deck, but it's still, you know, only 23 health is a lot that is not a lot to chew through when you got a lot of indirect damage and direct damage coming from Rex and those consistent dice.
Not to mention you snoking yourself.
What was that?
Not to mention you snoking yourself.
Yeah, and you're probably doing at least 2 damage to yourself over the course of the game. If you get 3 off, then you're just happy, I guess. But usually, Thrawn's probably, in most decks, Thrawn's going to be dead, or you're going to be so far ahead by the time the 3rd round comes around. But I guess one of the more interesting decks, too, that I also played was a Yoda Cassian deck, but it was kind of a hybrid. It was basically running damage upgrades, a bunch of control, and then Yoda Cassian. So if it was in a matchup where it was not likely to be able to win via mill, it could switch to a very heavy damage base. If it was, something that is really weak to mill, it just goes mill, and, Cassian Yoda baseline has got a lot of ability to just destroy your hand and deck. So it was pretty cool. I think depending on what the meta is, it's still probably better to focus one way or another when you're playing Cassian than going hybrid. But I mean, if you don't know what the field's like, it's certainly not the worst thing. And it's just 2 strong characters, and you start with an extra resource for profitable connections if you want that one. But I ended up losing the top 4 to, basically the top 4 was 3 of the people that I beat in Swiss, and then I lost into one of the Thrawn Snoke mirrors that I had won the first time. And since we were doing it by the books, doing the best of 1, that was just it. It's kind of like he got to resolve a Thrawn resource side with Snoke on round 1, and I didn't. And that's kind of the difference in that matchup. If you can stop your opponent from getting that extra bonus resources and you can't stop them, that's basically you losing the game in that kind of matchup, which is just kind of how mirrors go sometimes. But it was a lot of fun. Store Championships are definitely, after doing the whole regional season earlier this year and end of last year, I don't really take them too seriously. I really got into them last year, but regionals, I like the format a lot better, and Store Championships is kind of it's much easier to treat them as a more casual tournament, which is how FFG kind of wanted them to be.
So coming hot off Store Championship, there's still a lot of people listening who haven't experienced theirs. They're getting ready for them. There's some coming up this weekend. I know here in Dallas, we've got 2 or 3 in August. There's still a lot coming. It's not stopping anytime soon. And then immediately
they significantly expanded from last year. Just the amount that there are is at least doubled, I'd say.
Yeah, it feels like there's more, and it's a good thing, because as soon as Store Championships are over, we jump into Galactic Qualifiers being a little bit more prominent, and then right after that, you've got regionals. Yep. So starting from basically Way of the Force, we have a really hefty amount of tournament opportunities for players. And then, of course, with PAX Unplugged, the Cascade games, the contract is renewed for, season 2. So we get to see all the new swag, whatever it may be. And then, we've got Worlds, and we've got set 6, and we've got, everything is basically in a really sweet little cycle. It kind of starts with set 5, Store Champs, Galactic Qualifiers, Regionals, set 6, wrap up Regionals, go straight into potentially set 7/Worlds, or Worlds, set 7, whichever comes first. So where we are right now is the start in a long run of Destiny events. And based on what you saw, based on what you played, what do you think is going to do well? I mean, I'm not asking for your prediction on the most epic deck, but you've seen some things, and you've seen plenty of players, and I want to know a little bit more about, what do you like, what do you not like, what do you think might be, a little bit more explorable in terms of, undetermined territory?
There's definitely a handful of viable stuff still that's going to be fairly top tier right now in the meta. I think Thrawn Snoke is definitely one to watch out for. If you don't know how to play against it or haven't seen it, that's definitely a deck to expect. Obviously, not everybody's going to be as highly skilled with it as others, because it is a little bit more nuanced deck because of just the way things work with it and Thrawn's ability alone. But I mean, if your deck can't beat that's going to be a problem if you want to win major tournaments. Maybe not necessarily Store Champs, but if you're going to be going to GenCon or Nova, that's definitely a deck to beat. There's going to be some variant of hero vehicles out there that's going to be a thing to beat. I'm not sure what it is right now. I know Thrawn Snoke is pretty good against most of the hero vehicle decks right now, so that's kind of one of its weak points. I definitely expect to see a lot of Kylo and Kylo Price, Kylo Snoke. I would not say that that's necessarily a tier 1 deck, but it's something you'll see a lot of. It's slightly better than Kylo was before Worlds, maybe. I think that Snoke and Price are a better upgrade than Anakin, but I don't think that was a tier 1 deck at Worlds either. So
I think a lot of that has to do with a little bit of a cat and mouse type thing that we're seeing with with Kylo. Over the weekend, it did pretty well in a lot of store championships, but it was like in metas where a lot of people showed up with like mono blue decks, and it just kind of preyed on them. Like in the metas where you see a lot of the vehicle decks, you don't see them making the top cuts with the Kylo decks. And like those are the same tournaments where the random like Luke 2 or Luke 3 Ray 2 decks can kind of jump in there as well. So it really is kind of going back and forth. Like, do you expect Kylo Price to be well represented in your meta? Then you probably shouldn't play a mono blue deck.
Yeah.
If you do, then probably play a vehicle deck of some sort.
The mono blue decks aren't even that stellar feeling versus Thrawn Snoke either, though. Like that's the thing is like a lot of these decks really don't feel good against Thrawn Snoke. I think that is like a solid player with that right now. It's definitely one of the big baddies to watch out for. And on the other hand side, I think Hero Vehicles is really good right now. It's just that Thrawn Snoke is fairly good against it, and Mill's still good against it. And I guess Mill is another thing to mention because, like, there's numerous new possibilities for Mill. I think like Yoda Cassian's probably the most popular, and it's fast at milling you.
Well, it also has some of the best removal in the game right now too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Thrawn Snoke, like really, it's more Snoke based vehicle decks, I think.
Yeah. Because like, you can even do like a 3-character Snoke vehicle deck, and it's going to be pretty decent because you can make a lot of money. And that's the big thing. Thrawn just gives you the added benefit of being able to kind of like turn off at least one of their pieces of removal every round and just basically focusing into max damage every round. It's kind of like, I'm just going to let you do your thing. I'm going to remove your dice. I'm going to play vehicles. I'm going to focus on the max damage. I don't think you do that as much with other Snoke vehicle-based decks, but you can certainly make a reasonable amount of money, and you have more health, and you can still have pretty good control too. So
yeah, you got the Thrawn Snoke, you got the Snoke Rebel Trader Piet, you got the Snoke Elite, what is it? Bazine. So that's a 5-die Snoke.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of different versions on there that I'm not quite sure yet which is the best. I mean, Thrawn's ability kind of sets that over the top, but with the 3-character list, you gain the benefit of the Snoke resource generation or, focus or whatever for longer than you do with just the Thrawn. Because everybody's going to target Thrawn first and burn him down as quick as possible. But with the 3-character list, you still have that option, which whatever one they seem to go for hits you. Now, I will say that in the 3-character list, sometimes it's better just to knock out Snoke.
Especially if he's your only 2-die character, and he's got so much focus that
getting him
off the table is very helpful.
The very few times that I have lost with the Rebel Trader version is when the opponent goes after Snoke first.
A big question I have just personally, because I've noticed originally when the set was spoiled, a lot of people were afraid of Plo Koon Padawans and Rex with double clone troopers. And there was a lot of hype. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of talk behind those decks. And yet every time I see them show up to a tournament, they're not topping as nearly as consistently as everyone feared. Everyone thought it would be crazy. Plo Koon, you could drop so many upgrades, and, Plo could play as a 2-drop for free because the Padawan stack. And then, Rex with clone troopers would just roll so much damage and so much consistency in taking the battlefield. And both of those decks were at my store championship. Both of those decks were at your store championship. I know plenty of other reports where they were at other store championships, and I'm not seeing them perform nearly as well as like Snoke X decks. Is there any thought as to why those aren't doing nearly as well as initially considered?
I had wondered more about Plo specifically as well, because Plo is a deck that, like, if it goes off, it has some of the highest like damage potentials in the early rounds of the game than any other deck. Like, I was playing a casual game with it last night even, and it's like I was playing versus Cad Bane and Snoke. I had by the end of round 2, he had 2 health left total. I did 24 damage after shields and stuff, 24 damage in 2 rounds with Plo Padawans. That's ridiculous. Like, that high end in 2 rounds. And that's like with like 2 Ancients and a Dagger of Mortis, I think is basically what I had for upgrades. I think part of it is fairly role based for that. Like you got to roll reasonably well. You got to, if your opponent basically comes up against Plo and doesn't have any removal, and you have a starting hand where you can basically throw down 3 upgrades, and if you can get like +3s on your ancients with your focus sides too, like you're just going to dominate that game. So it's kind of, I think it might just be like a removal check kind of deck, and in that sense also maybe kind of like a more of a beginner deck that's not going to necessarily be able to take you to the top of any tournament, but like kind of like a Django Veers, you know, like it's explosive, it can do a lot of damage, it can be oppressive, but in the end it's not the best deck. And I think that's kind of closer to what we're looking at with Plo, at least if you're running it with like the full aggro double Padawans. Rex is a different story. I think Rex still has some staying power. Like he actually is pretty decent against Thrawn Snoke. I think it's just kind of the matter of actually finding Rex's best partners and his best kind of weapon set, like what kind of cards you're playing. If you're going for speed, if you're going for just taking your time and trying to get as much damage as you can, like kind of like, do you want to play Rex Blasters? Do you not need to play Rex Blasters? Do you want to play it with supports? Do you want to at least put the crate speeders in because they're cheap and very high value for what they offer? Do you want to play with like Maz? And if you play with Maz as a yellow character with Rex and a clone, you get, you know, easy pickings. You have the ability to try to go even more fast and even play stuff like hyperspace jump if you can resolve enough resources to keep doing all your stuff and then blow out your damage and jump away. Like there's a lot of like flexibility in Rex, despite the fact that you basically have to run him by him, like run him with clones. So like if you're running him elite with clones, you're basically accounted for 22 points, yet it's still a fairly flexible deck in what you can do with it. That's kind of funny.
I actually don't think that the best Rex deck is going to be with Elite Rex. But
and that's, you know, that's probably possible too, especially if you're going solely based on the battlefield. Because honestly, the thing is what you're like I've seen now is so many Rex decks are going for speed. And if you go for speed, you are basically ignoring Rex's ability. Like if you're trying to claim the battlefield every time, if you're trying to get out ahead, you're not getting any value out of Rex's ability, period. And unless the rest of the meta is faster than that. And at this point, like most of the Rex decks are like the faster decks in the meta outside of something like Cad Snoke or Solo Sabine. Like some of these Rex decks are like the faster decks in the meta, which is just kind of like silly. Yeah,
he seems to work really well in a vehicle shell, especially with being able to gain the battlefield every turn and getting that discount on your vehicles.
Yep.
You know,
that or the Guardian one. Those are my kind of like the ones that I have my eye out most for.
Yeah, my local store championship, it was won by a Rex vehicle deck that played, you know, 0 upgrades. And it's just, you know, using the weapons factory, just able to get that discount every turn where most vehicle decks are just not going to be able to do that. They're going to get it the first turn, and then after that, they're likely never going to claim first again, unless they're going against another vehicle deck or potentially a mill deck.
All right, well, another card that has seen a lot of play and has also started a lot of discussion, and I'd love to hear your guys' take on it, is Long-Term Plan. And I saw that put to great work and excellent value during my store champ, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I mean, we initially thought that was a very interesting plot. It had a lot of potential. I think everyone agrees if you see that in limited, you definitely draft it or put it in your deck just because of how good it is. And
it's like by far one of the best cards you can possibly get in limited. It's kind of crazy.
Right. And for those of you that don't know, essentially the plot states it's a 3-point red hero. It basically states you can either activate the card and put a resource on it, or you can activate it to resolve one of your dice and increase the value equal to the number of resources on the long-term plan plot. So, you know, in limited, when you're playing 6-7 turns, you know, your first turn, your second turn, even your third turn, you can tap it, put a resource on it, and then turn 4, your dice are going from 1 value to 4 value at the very worst. If you roll like a 2, that becomes a 5, and so on and so forth. Now, in sealed limited draft, it's really good, but it's beginning to see a lot of play. A lot of people are beginning to talk about it in standard, and I think it's really good, but I also wonder, is it going to be meta defining, or is it meta viable?
I mean,
I think that's an important question, but What were you say, Rick?
In my opinion, it's the hero version of Snoke, but it takes 2 turns to get to that start there. So you're not.
It's a hero version of Snoke, but it doesn't have 11 health or a bunch of focus sides on it.
Sure.
Like I think that's the problem with it, where it's like I don't know that it's going to be a dominant factor. I think it can be notably better than Profitable Connections in the right deck. And that's basically what you're contesting with if you're running red.
Well,
and I think running red is the real problem, because like if you could run that in like a blue or a blue-yellow deck, like you'd run that in probably Cassian Yoda, right? Like
but
absolutely.
Over Profitable Connections. I think the fact that it's red is very important to its power level.
But what it's doing, like in specifically for the Rose 2 Partisan deck, that's essentially giving it the Profitable Connections with the battlefield. You're gaining an extra resource essentially, and being relevant past turn 1. Like your probably first 2 turns are going to be adding a resource to it, and then after that you're either generating resources or using it for the little focus that you have in the deck to bump that to a 3 focus or whatever. Actually getting some value out of it that way, and you're essentially just getting Profitable Connections plus. But I also think that that's really the only viable place for it, really.
I mean, it's no joke when a Jedha Partisan goes from 2 indirect to 4 indirect, or you're looking at a disrupt or a discard, and you either wipe out a majority of their hand or all of their resources, just like that. I mean, it's not necessarily optimal because, of course, you do want the damage. But if you play that out with that crate speeder and it doesn't have the damage on it, you can max out at like 5 range damage because you show 2, you tap the long-term plan to add 2 additional damage, and then you put 1 damage on the card itself to increase the value by 1. That's a pretty explosive turn.
Yeah, but the problem is that Snoke is getting it from turn 1 on until you kill
a little bit of drawback, but
until you kill the character that he's snoking. But at that point, you generally don't need it. You probably got chance cubes out. You're focusing with Snoke and turning all your vehicles or supports or whatever to 7 indirect stuff and just overwhelming your opponent.
I don't think it's as good as Snoke because of the fact of, or as equivalent to Snoke as you might want it to be, just because of the fact that it essentially is like just not as valuable for like the point cost for what you're getting out of Snoke himself. I mean, Snoke is kind of like, I think, the person to talk about this set right now, and I think he might even be the most expensive card this set too.
Yeah, Snoke is generally the most. It's the Yoda of the set. It's the chase card. It's very expensive. It's an inexpensive character, a good amount of health, and it keeps your deck honest because you got to deal damage to get that boost.
He's like Yoda. Like, that's the good comparison. He's villain's Yoda, that perfect support character that just does so much for so many decks. I don't think he's going to bring back Villain Mill, though.
Nope. I've tried. It's not really good. I'm trying him with Jabba. It's very tricky. I really don't think that's where Villain Mill is. I don't know.
We need better plots still, I think. Like, blue yellow needs some more plots before that can really be a thing too.
Oh, I agree. I know. I'm trying really hard to figure out where Villain Mill is. I mean, because Hero Mill is just very aggressive. It's very efficient. And like I said, it's just got the removal pieces that are super good right now. Easy Pickings is just really good. It's stupid. It's stupid good. And then with, cards like Beguile, Entangle.
Which both sides have, to be fair.
that is true, but Easy Pickings really pushes it over the limit, I think.
I am in love with Beguile, though. That card is pretty much just an absolutely wonderful piece of removal. It's definitely my favorite of this set so far.
Yeah, every time I see it with Beguile, it feels really good to play that on an opponent just because you get a very high amount of value out of that card, and it's something that we have.
That's the only limiter. Like, if you can't pay for it, that's the hard part. But sometimes it actually is better than Mind Trick. It's not always better than Mind Trick, but there are actual times where it's better than Mind Trick, and that just shows you like Mind Trick is a card that's seen play in a lot of decks, especially in the last few sets going forward, is as removal gets more efficient and your decks get more cramped, you need to be throwing in more impactful removal, even if they cost a little bit more. Like sometimes that little bit more money is what you need just to conserve that extra card in your deck.
Yeah, I found that In the Crosshairs is becoming a new favorite of mine just because 3 resources for ambush and then just being able to declare whatever you want and remove that. It's really good. Of course, the mill decks I play create a lot of resources, so a regular deck that isn't built on any kind of economic structure is going to struggle to play it. But if your deck can make extra money with, scrap heap or something else, like in the Crosshairs is a really great option to just eat a lot of dice, and it doesn't even have to be showing damage. That's like the best part.
My favorite thing is when my opponent plays a beguile on me when I have 2 dice in the pool and they're thinking about which one they want to reroll.
It's like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Just blank one, remove one, buddy.
Feels a little wasteful when you do that, but it's always going to do something.
Well, that reroll never.
Well, I mean,
anyway.
If they're about to kill you, that matters.
Yeah. No, I mean, I compare it to Entangle. It's the blue version of Entangle that doesn't have a spot requirement. It does not remove 2 dice. It can never remove 2 dice, which is its worst feature. But on average, it's going to do more than Entangle, and it can always be used as long as your opponent has dice. Like, if they have a die in the field, you will be able to remove that die with Beguile. If they have a die in the field and you have Entangle, if it's a big vehicle dice, you might not be able to remove it, and that's going to feel really bad.
Yeah, I agree. I love Beguile. The more we've talked about it and the more I've played it, it's definitely, like, for the 2 resources, it's proven its worth very, very, very clearly. And
the not spot requirement is actually quite big for
it's nice.
Kind of deck that's running multicolors. Because if I ever played a vehicle deck with only 1 blue character, like, I just put Beguile in there and not worry, because you don't have to worry about saving your blue guy. You're going to have a lot of resources usually in those decks. Like,
yeah, I've been running a 2-1 split where it's 2 Beguile, 1 Entangle, just because every once in a while you'll run into a special based deck and you really don't want to deal with special chaining, or your opponent rolls like a 3 for 1 damage and then a blank, like Dooku. God forbid, sometimes, I mean, it happened to me once where they rolled double blanks and then they just flipped one of the blanks to a 3 for 1. I'm like, cool, Entangle. I can't do that with a Beguile. Now, of course, I'd probably leave the blank Dooku die alone, but just being able to remove 2 dice is very beneficial, especially if you're running against a Dooku Mother Talzin, because she's going to fix that die. So yeah, you have to respect the fact that even though they roll double blanks, you're probably going to take 5 damage to the face because they don't want to deal with easy pickings. Or they'll just, fix the blanks to a 3 for 1, then resolve the 3 for 1, then roll out Mama Talzin, then flip to the 3 for 1. So you're still taking, 5 to 6 damage in a sequential order. And just being able to get rid of that problem immediately is significantly less stressful than having to worry about, how do I deal with 3 damage? How do I deal with another 3 damage?
Yeah, triple threat is another one that I've been pretty surprised with too.
Yeah, I haven't played that one in Thrawn Snoke. I think it's better in a deck that wants to reroll its own character dice a bit too. Like, Thrawn Snoke usually doesn't need to reroll its own character dice, so triple threat doesn't feel like a good fit for that deck as much. And that's honestly the only villain deck I've been playing lately. But that card is definitely another card that's really cool, has a lot of potential, does not remove any dice, but can still massively affect both sides of the board.
I actually saw a card that we talked about and a lot of people have kind of laughed at, and that's Nature's Charm. It's the picture with the porgs, the 0 cost, where you reroll 2 dice. I'm not kidding. So the deck that won was a Luke 3 Ray 2 deck, and the guy who piloted was named Austin. And every time he played it, it was a really weird situation where he had no resources. The opponent would spend focus to flip one of their dice to like max damage. They were usually going for a kill, or they were using it to resolve their modified sides, and he would usually have a die showing nothing of value, and he would say, all right, I'm going to reroll my Ray or Luke die, and I'm going to reroll your modified or your base die. And more often than not, it would not come up, like the opponent's die would not come up with what they needed, and he would either get damage, or with Luke he would get a couple shields showing, and then he would resolve the shields to keep his characters alive until the next round. And it was like, I know Nick was like, that's a terrible card, but it saw value. I know you're not, but it kept the opponent guessing, because even with 0 resources, he still had a way to interact with dice on the table.
I just see it as like, okay, so if you want to use it on 2 of your dice, don't use that. Use literally any card, because any card can do that. If you want to use it on your opponent's dice, and it's not a special chain meta, which is what I would say now is just use Sound the Alarm. If you want to use it on one of each, then you can play the card, and it's still going to be weird and not very useful most of the time. So it's still just kind of like card, like I could consider maybe playing it in Trilogy, but there's way too many ridiculously good cards in Standard right now that I can't imagine personally ever wanting to play that one. Unless you love Borgs,
Like,
then maybe.
like I'm a huge fan of Unpredictable, you know, but I
Yeah, how long has it been since you played that card?
Right, exactly.
D House knows.
But it's
Nobody
kinda,
plays that.
it's kind of one of those cards that you just play when you need gray cards, I think. Like, I need some 0 cost, quote unquote, removal, and I need some gray cards. Oh, this kind of fits that.
I guess it has to be, yeah, it can be said for the Kylo meta at least. There's another reason to play it, but I don't know. Most of the time I'd rather just Sound the Alarm.
Yeah, I mean, I hate
He
Sound the
had
Alarm.
Sound the Alarm.
Yeah, that's Sound the Alarm number 2 or 3 and 4 when you need gray cards. But like, some people, you know, unpredictable effects can work for you. Most people, it's not going to. You're just going to remember the good times when you blow out D House and ruin his dreams of world championship.
To which he came back and did pretty well for himself. So
Yeah, he showed me.
that was unpredictable. Yeah, right.
That was probably more unpredictable than the year before.
It's just funny. That card has no place in the meta, but it's just a great story.
That card died almost immediately after even Spirit of Rebellion came out. Like, that was not even hardly in any decks at all after that, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, but
It went from kind of playable to never played again.
I mean, most people that play Django were playing that. Like, whether you're playing Django Veers, Django Trooper, like, that was a very popular pick for Django decks.
But we're gonna see a little bit. We're gonna see a little bit of that effect come back when rotation actually hits, where you're looking for cards that are gonna fill out your deck again. Now, granted, we're never gonna be in a one set meta again, but you know, there's still a lot of cards that you look at first glance, and there's just so many better things out there. But once those better things that are pretty much probably should have never been made in the first place rotate out, then you're going to have these little options that you never thought about before.
Yeah.
Maybe Unpredictable will get reprinted again.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would happen. Why?
It's
It might, but does it need to be, really?
It's still probably
Would
won't
you
get played.
play it?
If there was no better option.
I mean, it's not played right now in an environment where the card is legal. Would it, like, if you reprinted it, have a
look at the
resurgence?
stuff that's already been reprinted. Those are like actually staple cards that definitely are played, and I think that's probably what we'll see more going forward.
Well, I mean,
Like,
we
what,
have
Doubt?
Logistics, Doubt, Tactical Mastery, Flank.
well, Doubt's pretty
Strategic
much gotten to
planning
the
is-
point where you don't want to play it anymore either.
Yeah, Doubt's at a rough spot, but it's still 0 cost and it can remove dice, so it's not bad. It just might not be good enough right now.
I haven't seen it played anywhere recently.
Once Dice stopped having a bunch of modified sides on them, and then all of a sudden everything's just base side. Like,
It's still really good on Ancient Sabers. Can't deny that.
It's true. I mean, it's not terrible. It's just character dice right now are significantly higher value from the old days where you'd have like a base, a modified, a blank. Like, old character dice, you used to essentially have 2 blanks on them for a doubt roll. Now they're like five base sides, 1 blank, and like 3 of them are good. And you're like, I don't know if I want to risk that. That's tricky.
like when you're playing against
At the same time, I still don't love Hidden Motive, personally. Like, Hidden Motive just makes me angry more often than not.
I mean,
Well, you're calling the wrong symbol.
if you're
Clearly, it's operator error.
if you're sitting across a Thrawn Snoke player and you got Doubt in your hand as your only removal, you're going to feel really bad because there's not a single side on any of those dice that you want them to hit. That card then just says, it just reads 0 cost, reroll any number
Discard
of
to
your dice.
reroll.
Yeah.
It's a nature's charm.
For any dice of yours,
Yeah, just reroll your dice. Discard to reroll.
but it is gray.
Yeah, it's great in that Kylo matchup. Oh boy. All right, so I actually went to a store championship over the weekend. I was the judge. It was at Boardwalk Games here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I had a blast. Got to meet a lot of new people, got to hang out with some people I had previously played some games with over at Collected in Fort Worth. And I thought this was a lot of fun. Everyone was super chill. It was a great tournament. We had 18 players, and the cool parts were it was a even split for hero and villain. So it was 9 and 9. I didn't read over every single deck in the deck lists, but I don't recall any duplicate decks. I'm like 90% sure all 18 decks were unique. And like I said, we saw things like, Plo Koon, we saw Rex, we saw Kylo Price. We also saw some very interesting decks like Count Dooku and Newt Gunray, which made it into the top 4. There was also a Yoda Rose Jawa vehicle deck, which made it into the top 4. That was a really fun one to watch. There was there was also a Battle Droid Greedo Baby Vader deck, and it didn't make it into the top cut, but it did have my favorite story of the day. It was Greedo versus the opponent's last character, and what we've all been talking about happened with Greedo. He rolled out lethal damage and killed the opponent before Greedo was defeated, even though he had technically been defeated just because of the way the damage was dealt. And you just hear this from a side of the room, and we walk over, it's like, what happened? Yeah, well, Greedo got shot, used his effect, and his opponent had 1 health, and Greedo rolled 1 damage, and Greedo shot first. It's like, whoa, that's an interesting story to tell. You don't see that very often. So anyways, it was a great turnout. Everyone was super nice. We had people of all ages and all skills. We had a family come and play. It was really cool. But the top 4 came down to the Rose double partisan vehicles. You had Luke 3, Rey 2. You had the Rose Yoda Jawa, and the Count Dooku Newt Gunray. And I know some people have been asking about Dooku and Gunray. I thought of the top 4 that was the most interesting, just because it was a very, very interesting choke deck. Basically, the premise was it played the plot that reduced your resources to 1 at the start of the game. And then after that, you had to deal with Newt either reducing your resources or milling you. And the problem for a lot of players were, like, at the start of the game, they didn't make enough money to put upgrades out, and that allowed Dooku to run rampant, because you have 2 problems. Either Dooku is going to deal 6 damage for 2, and you're just going to take it to the face, or you have to play removal, which means no upgrades for you. So you're losing on 2 fronts, and you have to figure out which is worse. On top of that, Newt does Newt things. Newt can focus, Newt can make money, Newt can do some indirect damage. Newt just kind of sits there. And so you have a problem of, I need to kill Newt so I can stop losing my money and stop milling myself. And then Dooku goes unchecked. But if Dooku gets, beat up on, you have some redeploy sabers that can scoot over to Newt, and then he can throw out, final lethal damage. So it was a very interesting choke mid-range kind of deck. I would be interested to try it myself. But props to the pilot. That was a very unique approach to this mid-range control choke deck, and I thought it was really cool. Especially, we don't see Newt anywhere, so I thought it was neat. The Yoda Rose Jawa was also very interesting. Yoda and Rose did Yoda and Rose things. Yoda did special chaining. Rose made money and took damage tokens off the Crate Speeder and the Modified Hawk. Surprisingly, the Jawa was the most interesting piece of that pie. He was there to garbage shoot. You would use his die for caution. Every once in a while, he would actually roll damage, and you would just, take some pot shots at your opponent. But it was just interesting because he was basically an extra piece of health to keep your characters alive a little bit longer. And usually the opponent let the Jawa live. So, they go after Yoda or Rose first, and the Jawa is just utility the whole game. He's tapping out, either dealing damage, he's being used for cautions, he's being used for garbage shoots, and then with 6 health, generally there was a way to cheat 3 shields on him, so now you have to deal with a 9 health character on top of all the vehicles that were on the table. So it was a very interesting deck. It did follow the traditional, double, try and get your Y-Wings out, try and get your Crate Speeders out, your Air Speeders, your Modified Hawks, and those were like the general damage sources for the deck. But I thought it was cool. It's very interesting.
Those decks that are running like a random Gungan or a Jawa, a lot of times what they end up being in this meta is a little 6 health bubble shield. That's a place that you can just put all your indirect damage. You can, like you said, throw them in the garbage chute, stuff like that. So it's kind of cool to see that these are getting a place for them outside of just a straight up Gungan deck or something like that.
Yeah, that's very true. Generally, you're correct. If there was any kind of indirect damage, it went straight to the Jawa. And yeah, it's neat. I think there's probably a little bit more space to tweak the deck, but based on what I saw and how it performed, it's really good. It did have some troubles against, like in the top 4, the Rose Double Partisan played against the Count Dooku and the Newton Gunray deck, and so the Rose Partisan lost game 1 and then won game 2 and game 3. The Yoda Rose Jawa faced off against Luke 3, Ray 2. It lost game 1, it won game 2, and it lost game 3. And it was a very narrow margin for both games, or all 3 games actually. None of them were blowouts. There was, you lose the game and your opponent has like 2, maybe 4 health left. So it really came down to a die roll, and that was about it. So it's a good deck. If you're listening, might be for you. It's very interesting. You don't have the yellow in it, so no Jar Jar, but also no Jar Jar. Like, there's good things about Jar Jar, there's bad things about Jar Jar.
Any deck that can say it doesn't have Jar Jar in it, I'm for it.
I love Jar Jar. He's so good. He's so fun. He can win games. He can also lose games. He's a very polarizing character. That's a good way to put it.
I think that should be our basis for analyzing every character from out here on out. If it sucks, at least it's not Jar Jar.
It's not Jar Jar. It's better than. And the finals were Luke 3 versus Ray 2 versus Rose Double Partisan. And believe it or not, it almost went to time. Out of the 120 minutes allocated, there were only 10 minutes left. They played 3 games. It was a nail biter each game. Like, I know people might say, "Dear Lord, why just 90 minutes." Well, actually 110 minutes of play. That seems insane. But each game was just really, really well played. I have to give props to both Austin and Michael. It was really fun to watch. It was really fun to judge. And it was something epic, because there was some really interesting stuff that just kind of showed up and you're like, what the heck is this? So, like, long-term plan was really interesting to watch, because it would just create blowout plays where you're just looking at, I've got like no money, I've got no damage, but I haven't rolled anything out. You roll out, a resource, and your opponent doesn't remove it. So you go, cool, long-term plan, 3 resources. So now you have 5. And they're like, okay. You play a piece of removal, then you play a Y-Wing. And then, you use the Y-Wing to deal 4 damage. You're like, oh, sweet. That was a great trade. The spiciest thing that was in the Luke Ray deck was a single copy of Master of the Council. And that die rolled stupid hot. It was either a special or the +4 modified side. So either way, that die was just value for days. There was also a Republic Cruiser. There were 2 Republic Cruisers in the deck. So Luke and Ray were very, very heavily shielded for the entire game. It was really hard to do much, especially with so many indirect damage decks. Like, all the vehicle decks deal a lot of damage. The problem is it's all indirect damage. So when your opponent has 2 Y-Wings and you've got 6 shields, it wasn't uncommon to see 6 shields get eaten and then 1 damage on each character. Or sometimes they would take 6 shields off, take a resource, and then put 1 damage on a character. So 8 damage that could have happened, only 1 of it really stuck the landing. And that really kept this deck alive for every game it played, was just being able to pump out so many shields and just kind of ignore the indirect damage, and then throw out, an Ancient Lightsaber, a Shoto, shield up Ray, keep doing plink damage the entire game, and then, just consistently deal 5, 6, 7 damage every turn. Those Jedha Partisans drop really quick. Rose, 9 health, that's gone. Usually, like, the start of turn 2, Rose is dead. So you can't use her special ability to proc the modified Hawk or the Crate Speeder. And then, You've got to let those partisans hold a lot of weight on their shoulders. It's just an interesting thing because like the vehicle deck can make it happen. The Luke deck can make it happen. Both of them are really, really interesting to watch, and they do require a lot of thought. They're not very simple decks to pilot, but I think both of them are very meta viable right now.
I think that's a perfect example why I think villain vehicle decks should be running at least one first order TIE fighter
for all the shields. Yeah, and that's what's kind of nice about the Thrawn Snoke is that they're like, okay, so there's a lot of bad villain vehicles, or there's a lot of things that are kind of like really niche about them, like ATDP for 3 is kind of bad compared to the hero ones. But in a meta where there's hero vehicles and they're running like only 2 drops because like Hawk, the crate speeder, and the air speeder, like when there's 6 2-drop vehicles in your deck, like suddenly ATDP sounds like absolutely amazing for that kind of thing. And even an ATST can actually be playable now in something like Thrawn Snoke.
Yeah, it's very true. I actually think you're going to see a lot more Ewok Village potentially, just because on average, like usually Luke and Rey are throwing shields up like after a lot of the dice have been rolled and resolved. And at that point, like you just don't have enough dice or damage to deal like a flat 6 damage. But if you throw a lot of damage out and the shields get taken off and you stick a little bit of damage to a character and then they just shield up like crazy with things like, heightened awareness or caution or whatever, you just claim the battlefield and essentially you deal damage equal to the number of shields that were removed, which is fairly impactful, especially with Rey, who wants shields so she can deal plink damage. If you can remove that, then you're forcing Luke to go first in a hope of putting shields on Rey if they don't have a Shoto lightsaber. If they do have a Shoto, they're going to have to put shields on Rey instead of eat your shields. So like there's benefits to that battlefield, I think.
I'm glad I got one of those fancy full art ones.
Oh, from the GQ?
Yeah, unfortunately I'm all about vehicle decks right now. It's kind of useless.
Vehicle decks are fun, though.
Yeah, but they're not the kind of deck you want to play Ewok Village in.
No, not at all. So, anyways, store championships are in full swing. There's plenty to talk about. There's a lot of great decks out there, and I still think there's a lot of decks to be discovered. I don't think we're near the full knowledge of what's good and what's bad. I think we're discovering a lot. And with Nova coming up and GenCon even sooner, we're going to have a great opportunity to see what high-level players are playing. But as we saw in the previous meta, there were lots of decks that were, well-known, very popular. And then at a regional, the one I happened to go to, we saw Boba 7th. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, hey, this is a deck that's not only good, but extremely competitive. And I love the fact that, it's never over. It's never like so deep in the meta that you can say, well, that's it. We figured everything out. Boba 7th was born because like Mitchell didn't have a Phasma. And so, when people are asking me like, what do you think is the best deck? What do you think is the best blah, blah, blah? It's like, there's X, Y, and Z that are available right now. There's A, B, and C that we know about. There's 1, 2, and 3 that's up and coming. But don't forget, someone can show up to your regional with a deck and just blow the doors wide open. It's never over. And that's what's exciting about Destiny, especially with even more characters and team combinations available. I wouldn't be surprised if during regionals, same thing happens. Someone at a regional, their group just shows up with this deck and everyone goes, wait a minute, this is really good. No one's played this. No one's even thought about it. And we see, another Boba 7th just pop out of the woodwork and we go, hey, this is worth playing at the GQ. This is worth playing at the regional.
So another new deck that's kind of popping up. It's kind of like the new OTK, more like the first round kill, not just like kill you in one round all at once. It's literally kill you in the first round of the game. This is the draw your entire deck and then kill them with the launch base salvo for 13 or so, which will kill pretty much anything. I don't know where this started. I think it won a store championship or it just did well in a store championship somewhere. People have been trying to make launch bay decks a thing for a long time. It's been a thing here and there. There's a few new cards that helped it out. There's more draw. There's spot a plot to be able to draw some cards. There's the ability to recurse things back into your deck from your discard pile, multiple cards. there's the Gungan warrior who's cheap and allows you to have enough characters to just kind of stall out. Like all you have to do is survive till the end of round 2 or 1 or 2, and you should be able to have your whole deck drawn and be able to do enough to basically one-shot your opponent's entire team. The premise is just kind of draw a bunch of cards with all the draw cards you can imagine in the game. Some of your cards that you'll have in your deck will also be like get you money cards, like maybe like Truce or Respite, where you can exhaust a character to draw a card and get a money, because you need about 5 to 7 money to really get the full combo in a round. You're usually want to go for like premonitions to be able to play that launch bay that cost 5 for free. But yeah, I mean, it's really all about the draw and stuff. The big thing is, unless your opponent has a lot of discard, a lot of disrupt, or solid removal options in the first round before you can hit them with like friends in low places. There are just times where you can play against this deck and you just don't have anything in your starting hand to be able to deal with it, or you don't know what the deck's going to do and you don't mulligan for it. You might just lose the game on the first round. There's not much you can do about it. Some of the like more aggressive decks that don't run much removal, they're not going to be able to do much. They're going to try to do damage. They're not going to be able to kill everybody in the first round, and then just their opponent probably has like a 75% chance or better to just be able to go off if they sequence things right, if unimpeded. And that's kind of ridiculous what you can do with it. Now, if you're kind of aware of it, there's a little bit of like tools to be able to play around it. Obviously, like discarding them early, your own friends in low places, probe, disrupting them so they can't draw with because a lot of the draw cards cost money. There's a few options here and there. Snoke with anyone with a discard or a disrupt side is really good against it, and Thrawn being able to call a card right away at the beginning is pretty good against it. And if you have any way of destroying the launch bay, which there's not a lot of in the meta that could do that, it's a weird deck. And it's super awful to play against if you do not have the tools in your deck for it. If you're playing a deck that is not keeping this one in mind and you run up into it, you will be very upset probably after playing it. And I don't know if we're going to see any kind of like nerfs to this, just because it's like it borderlines on some of like the worst kind of experiences to play against in this game. Like in terms of like how stupid it feels to play against, it's worse than Thrawn Ankar. It's worse than like most of the other decks that have gotten nerfed before. But I don't know if it's going to see enough play, or if it's workaroundable by enough other decks that it won't actually see any nerf. I think it really just depends. If we see this thing pop out everywhere and start winning store champs all around the world, then I imagine they won't hesitate to figure out a way to errata something to make it not work. It's nothing character based. It would have to be like an errata on launch bay or something with drawing the cards or something. Like there's not a lot of answers to it.
I mean, I think people will just learn to play around it. It's just one of those decks.
But I mean, you can't always play around it. If they get the right hand to start and they can friends with low prices first action, get your only removal, you just might not be able to do anything.
Yeah, but a lot of that card draw is mutual.
Just one. Just to don't get cocky.
You're right.
Neutral one.
Just don't claim against it. You'll be all right.
Yeah. Don't ever claim in the first round unless you literally have no possible way of doing anything at all. Even if they go first in the second round, it's okay.
I've had a lot of people ask me about this deck. What do you think? How do you feel? And it's a thing. It's out there. It exists. I don't know if it's consistent enough to legitimately say it's a negative play experience. Like a lot of people have said,
it is consistent enough, I'd say. But that's really the question: is how many decks does it get to be completely unimpeded versus
right? And that's the thing. I feel like right now there might not be enough hype behind the deck, so a lot of people don't know what it is, and then when it goes off they go, oh no, I had a terrible experience with it. And that's fair. The deck is realistically NPE. It's built to just do one thing, and if it does it you lose, and if it doesn't do it you win. So yeah, it's a glass cannon deck that's really glass cannon-y. But once more people see it, once more people talk about it, once it sees a little bit more play, I feel like people will mulligan a lot heavily for multiple pieces of removal. So if they do get hit with friends in low,
I mean, you do have to have a lot. The problem being is that you also have to be able to remove. You have to remove not just the launch bay, but you have to remove it a second time after strategic planning. And if everything goes right enough for them, they can even strategic planning it, multiple times in a round. Like if things go super right for them, you need to have a fistful of removal to be able to stop them. Not just one, not just two, but at least three.
So it maybe, I mean, like what we just have to see. The thing is we've seen OTK decks before, we've seen glass cannon decks before, and we've seen gimmicky decks before. There was one at Worlds where it was all about gimmick. It was a gimmick about getting Crime Lord off twice in turn one. And so you had like Bazine Natal, 2 Dark Advisors. Can't remember what the 4th character was, but you're just drawing a booty load of cards. You're making a bunch of money, and you're just using Ace in the Hole to cheat out Crime Lord. And if you just got the God roll, you got the nuts, you could kill a 2-character list turn 1. If you didn't, you could kill him turn 2. And it was just like a flat Crime Lord turn 1, Crime Lord turn 2, game over. And I mean, it happened and people won with it, and it's nowhere to be seen right now.
I will say this is definitely more consistent than that.
Sure.
By quite a bit, but I still don't know if it's going to be enough.
Right.
We'll see.
So, if
don't play the deck at your locals. People, it's just not if it's a casual thing. Like maybe you can for fun. Let them know about it before, and don't try to trick people and make them feel bad. You're gonna get hated by your locals if that's all you play for the next month.
I mean,
that's my advice to you. But I like playing fair and being nice to people.
That's true. I think it's funny. People are calling it the Launch Bay deck, like BAE, or someone called it like Hotcakes.
I hadn't heard that one.
I like Launch Bay because from Overwatch, you've got Maze Bay. She's the ice user, so I like the. I mean, you're an Overwatch fan, you know what I'm talking about. So, but like talking about it, thinking about it, it's hard to assess because it's also very similar to Django Veers. Like if it's hot, you win. If it's not, you lose. And I mean, if this gets popular, you could see villain decks start running things like Lying in Wait, where they just eat your entire hand out. And it's just like, oh, you've got 15 cards, lying in wait. You do not have 15 cards. You have however many cards I have left in my hand. So
yeah, I mean, even if you get discarded, like 6 cards, like between the amount of cards that you have to play, you also get to a point where like eventually you can't launch bay for much more than like 6 or 7, and that's not enough to actually win the game. You gotta still have a fistful of cards in order to end the game.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how to approach it, to be really honest, because it's not 100% consistent. If you pull off some of the dice, even if your opponent hits you with mill or some sort of hand disruption, like close quarters assault, still a thing. And guess what? A lot of the decks being played right now have melee sticks, so you could get hit for CQA for 4, and if they get the right cards out of your hand, like I know the deck runs cheat, I know the deck runs rebel, but guess what? If they hit enough of those and you just don't draw the other pieces, you're just dead. Like that deck doesn't do any damage outside of launch bay. And I know it's very negative and you draw all these cards and you do all these things, but you still have the odds and opportunity to not draw the pieces you need. It could happen. So I just don't think it's consistent enough to be warranted like a tier 1 A-list super plus meta deck. It's going to be played in the meta for sure. People like it, people think it's fun, people think it's neat that they can just blow you out of the water turn 1. Is it going to be the dominant force? I don't know. I really don't. Especially if it really gets a lot of traction, there's going to be people who will build decks to directly counter the launch bay deck. So I'm not sure.
It's always fun to see combo decks kind of show up, though. I don't like that whenever they do show up, it's all NPE, ban, NPE, but unfortunately without a sideboard, it kind of makes it a little rough.
Yeah, you can't really, you don't get the best 2 out of 3. You don't get the opportunity to tech in cards that are just, hate cards for specific deck types. But I mean, I like combo decks too.
I'm not going to be playing Lying in Wait in all my villain decks, just in case,
I mean, I will. I love that card. It's super good.
Okay.
But I'm a mill player, so that's like the entire archetype I play is no cards in your hand, no cards in your deck. Boom. Game over.
Can we get that rotation? Make some of that stuff go away.
November is when we're supposed to get set 6, which means we could see set 7 in March, April. Could happen. You never know.
Believe it when I see it.
It's very true. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is the end of the show. It was a lot of fun. Store Champs, if you have the opportunity to go to a Store Champ, just go, have some fun. We had someone come out who hadn't played, I think they said since Spirit of Rebellion, and they brought a jank deck, and they had a lot of fun. I think they placed in top 8. I'm not sure, but I mean, Store Champs are a great opportunity to build community, meet new friends, meet new players, even attract new players. There's a Pokemon pre-release that happened during Store Champs, and while the Pokemon players were gathering, we had a couple come over and say, you know, what's this? I'm a fan of Star Wars. This looks interesting, and you know, we told them a little bit about it, and they said, you know, maybe they'll come by on one of the open play nights and just check out the game. But you know, you never know. You really don't know. A lot of people are always asking, how do we grow the game? How do we grow our community? Hey, show up to your local events at your game store, support the game. You know, when there's more bodies playing a game, that means, you know, there's more stuff happening, and that will gain the attention of people in the store. They'll come over and go, hey, what's going on here? There's, you know, 20 people. What kind of game is this? Oh, hey, you know, Star Wars Destiny, blah, blah, blah. Great opportunity to just, you know, talk about the game, give them a quick sales pitch, invite people to the events. That's a great opportunity to make new friends and find new players. So with that being said, this has been a great show. We've got just so many more things coming up in the next few weeks. We've got Nova. Gen Con's like, what, week and a half, 2 weeks away. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to be said for Gen Con. Some maybe new announcements for things. Who knows? We'll see. Then right after that is like Nova, I think like 2 weeks after. So just a lot of exciting stuff going on. So thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week. And as always, may the Force be with you. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join us on all of our social media outlets. And a big thank you to all of our Patreons for your support. We can't do this without your help, so make sure to join us for all of our exclusive Knights of Ren content.